Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time out of your schedules to join us for this webinar. My name is Michael Roth, and I'm part of the team at DWD Technology Group. We're a Sage 100 partner located here in Northeast Indiana. We provide Sage 100 support services to companies throughout the Midwest, and we're always trying to find ways for Sage 100 users to become more efficient and get the most out of their software. Today, Don Farber from Vineyard Soft Corporation will be presenting this webinar and will be showing us the new technology in version 10 of Alerts and Workflow for Sage. Due to the number of attendees, you will be muted for the presentation, but feel free to use the command to raise your hand or submit questions via the chat. We will go over as many of the submitted questions as we can at the end. So without any further ado, go ahead, Don.
Thanks very much, Mike, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today to talk about Sage Alerts and Workflow. I'm going to divide this presentation into a couple of different parts, starting off with an overview of what Sage Alerts and Workflow is. We'll review its top 10 uses, talk about how the product is licensed and priced, and finish up by going into a live product demo. So let me start off by giving you a little bit of background. You heard Mike introduce me, Don Farber with Vineyard Soft. That is the name of my company. Well, to be more accurate, that was the name of my company up until about 2 years ago when a larger organization called ECI, a company of over 1,000 employees worldwide, purchased Vineyard Soft. So we are officially now known as ECI, although the Vineyard Soft name does still get a lot of press. The application we're going to talk about is Sage Alerts and Workflow, which has the lovely acronym of SAW. And finally, we're going to talk about using SAW with your Sage 100 ERP application. But one concept that you'll hear me repeating a number of times is that Sage Alerts and Workflow can work not only with Sage 100, but with your other business applications as well, regardless of whether those applications are being hosted on-prem, within your organization, or in the cloud. And so with that introduction, let's talk about Sage Alerts and Workflow and a concept called actionable insight. Now, Alerts and Workflow really focuses on two things for an organization. It automates the process of detection of critical, time-sensitive business conditions, activities, and anomalies, and when it finds that those conditions occur, it automatically responds to them. And so that's where we get this concept of actionable insight. Now, if we drill down one layer deeper, we can actually identify three specific benefits of actionable insight. And the first is to automate those repetitive tasks that you and your colleagues do every day, often multiple times a day, and either in part or wholly manually, whether it's sending out invoices, order confirmations, running reports, etc. Secondly, actionable insight automatically enables you to identify and respond to exceptions, to anomalies, to potential problems before they become real problems. And the key here is the fact that this process is no longer a manual one of you having to run reports and then print them out and then stand there with your highlighter pen looking for just those exceptions or anomalies that require your attention. And thirdly, Sage Alerts and Workflow frees up your staff's time for those tasks that uniquely require human intervention. I like to say if it can be automated, it should be automated. Because if you've got a process such as invoicing, being a very typical one, that is either wholly or in part reliant upon human intervention, let's automate that process through Alerts and Workflow, and let's free up those staffers who were doing that manually to do those tasks that uniquely require the human brain and human interaction. Okay, so let's start off by talking about Sage Alerts and Workflow and how it provides actionable insight for automating repetitive tasks. Now, I already mentioned what some of these tasks are: processing orders, doing invoicing, sending shipment confirmations, notifying clients about shipments that are going to be delayed, about invoices that are coming due or past due, automatically generating and delivering reports, etc. There are a lot of these tasks. When you think about your average day and those tasks that you do day in and day out, and how some of those tasks can in fact be automated. So let's pick on just one of them, invoicing. Because if you sell to customers, you have to invoice and collect from those customers. So I want you to consider the following question. Within your organization, whose job is it to run and review the reports, the lists of invoices coming due? Whose job is it to now generate those invoices and deliver them to your customers? And how are they delivered? Are they printed? Are they emailed? Are they faxed? Are they done up in an electronic format and otherwise delivered? And then once those invoices are delivered, whose job is it to check to see if those invoices are getting paid and getting paid on time? Whose job is it to run those AR aging reports? And again, make sure that clients are paying for their purchases in a timely fashion. And of course, some clients don't pay in a timely fashion. So one last question, whose job is it to review those past due clients, those delinquent clients, and potentially put them on credit hold if their invoices are not being paid? If in fact you answer some or all of these questions with, well, it's actually my job, or it's one of my staffers, one of my colleagues' jobs to do this, then I'd advocate that you consider a system that automates these tasks, thus increasing your human time to help grow your business. So now let's talk about the second aspect of actionable insight, identifying ERP exceptions, anomalies. I like to refer to those as those times during the day when you become aware of a business condition, an overdue invoice, low stock, and you say to yourself, if only we had known. If only we had known about that, we could have done something about it. We could have prevented the problem from happening. And if you question whether or not you spend some amount of your day doing this exception management, well, here's a question that you can, I think, use to answer that query, which is, if you were to open up your top desk drawer, would you find at least one highlighter pen there, most likely in yellow? That seems to be a favorite color, but perhaps yellow-green, as we have here, or other day-glow colors. I've yet to visit an organization whose workers do not make copious use of yellow highlighter pens. And if you think about it, when you run a report and you sit there with your highlighter pen going through that report one page at a time, you already know what are those anomalies, those exceptions that you're looking for. In fact, chances are you already know how you need to respond to them once you find them. And if both of those things are true, you know what you're looking for, you know how you need to respond to them, then again, that's a task that should be automated. So again, let's consider a scenario. If you keep stock, then it's a matter of fact that occasionally you run out of stock. So some questions to ask yourself. Whose job is it to review your stock status? Whether it's running a stock status report or doing some kind of a database query. How often do you need to review that data? Is it weekly, daily, hourly, every 5, 10, or 15 minutes? And then, assuming that there are some items that have perhaps dropped below their reorder level, are within 5 or 10% of their reorder level, whose job is it to decide whether purchase orders need to be created? Of course, the person who creates that purchase order probably isn't the same person who needs to review them and approve them, especially if they're over a certain dollar total. So whose job is that? You know, so often those purchase orders that are awaiting approval just sit on someone's desk in their virtual inbox. Chances are in their email, just waiting for someone to get to and review. Once they're approved, whose job is it to submit those purchase orders to your suppliers? And finally, once the PO is submitted to your supplier, whose job is it to keep track of those items' expected delivery, to make sure they arrive on time and with an acceptable and hopefully very low number of damaged items? Again, these are all tasks that you and your colleagues need to perform and probably do perform on a daily or weekly basis. So if the question is, whose job is it, what we're advocating here is to let the answer be Sage Alerts and Workflow, because that's exactly what it's designed to do. Again, we go back to that concept of actionable insight. Alerts and Workflow has insight into what's going on in Sage 100. Any conditions that are important to your organization can be monitored and responded to by Alerts and Workflow. And of course, not just transactions, pain points, exceptions, anomalies, and then Alerts and Workflow responds to those conditions. That's the action part of actionable insight, by notifying the appropriate people, delivering the right information to the right time, triggering additional research, or updating Sage 100, or even other business applications. Okay, so you've got a general idea for what Sage Alerts and Workflow is all about. Let me now actually paint for you the components of this technology. It starts out by monitoring your Sage 100 application for any business conditions that are important to you. Overdue invoices? Sure. Low stock? Yes. Purchase orders that are waiting for review and approval? Yes. Customer who's changed their buying habits? Yes. Any condition you can imagine can be monitored for by alerts and workflow. And when it finds that some of those conditions occur, the very first thing it does is to tell people about it. Your staff, your vendors or suppliers, your clients, and those notifications go out via all different methods. Email, of course, text messaging to a cell phone, you bet. Dynamic web dashboard so people can just get a quick glimpse of what's going on in your business, yes, again. But as we mentioned with the situation of clients with overdue invoices, sometimes just letting a client know, hey, you've got an overdue invoice isn't sufficient. Ideally, what you want to do is resend them a copy of their overdue invoice. And so Alerts and Workflow has the ability to automatically generate and deliver all of your standard forms and documents: order confirmation, invoice, statement, purchase order, work order. All of them can be automatically generated and delivered by Alerts and Workflow. We talked about monitoring stock status and identifying, for example, when an item is within 5 or 10% of its reorder level. Alerts and Workflow has a number of different analytical choices that it can execute in response to such conditions. Maybe we need to generate a very detailed stock status report, whether it's from Crystal, from Microsoft SQL Server reporting services, from Sage Intelligence, Sage Enterprise Intelligence. All of your analytical tools can also have their reports generated and delivered by Alerts and Workflow. And we even go one step further than that, because sometimes a picture is really worth 1,000 words. Why generate a 20-page stock status report when I can simply generate a nice-looking pie chart or bar chart, for example, showing the history of an item's sales over the last 6, 9, or 12 months. And note that the application is called Sage Alerts and Workflow. And that and workflow part is very important because the solution itself can go back into Sage 100 and actually add or update records. If a client is past due, delinquent in paying for their invoices, Alerts and Workflow can put that client on credit hold. If an item has dropped below its reorder level, Alerts and Workflow can automatically generate a purchase order for that item. So that's the workflow part of the picture. And please pardon me, occasionally I need to grab myself a quick sip of water as we go between slides. So I promised you that I'd go through the top 10 most common uses of Sage Alerts and Workflow for Sage 100 customers, and here they are. Number 1, monitoring stock levels. You know, the last thing you want to hear from your staff is, we ran out of that item. Oops, we didn't know we were running so low. So prevent those situations, and again, not just by sending alerts when a stock drops below its reorder level, but perhaps within 5, 10, or 15% of its reorder level, and looking at an item's lead time if purchased from a vendor, including integration with Sage Inventory Advisor if you also happen to be using that application. The automatic delivery of shipping details. Now, some of the screens that I'm showing you here, the first one was the example of an alert, an email alert that goes out. Now here we're actually looking at the design of an alert message right within Alerts and Workflow itself. So here's the design of an alert that's showing us a list of those orders that were shipped out today. And as you'll see, once we jump into the application, everything is wizard driven. You have complete control over what your alerts say and who they're delivered to, and of course, via what delivery method. Invoicing. We talked earlier about automating manual tasks, whether it's for sending an order confirmation to a customer to thank them for their order, make sure that you have all their details correct, or perhaps sending out invoices to customers as those invoices are coming due or are past due. And of course, you've already got your invoice form designed in Crystal, most likely, but could also be in SSRS. Alerts and Workflow can use that existing form, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, when we talk about invoicing, it's good to use Alerts and Workflow to send off those initial invoices, but truly collections are, for me, the sweetest of sweet spots for Alerts and Workflow. If invoices become 30 days past due, 60, 90, 120 days past due, let's have Alerts and Workflow automatically regenerate invoices for those delinquent payments and have those delivered to the customer, perhaps carbon copy the sales rep, or perhaps simply send each sales rep a list of their clients' overdue invoices. So the appropriate information is getting delivered to the appropriate people, because honestly, the last thing you want to have to do is write off bad debt. That's a chore that no CFO enjoys. Now, so far we've talked about what I would consider fairly routine alerts and workflow actions by Sage Alerts and Workflow. But in fact, the application can get a lot more sophisticated in terms of the types of conditions that it identifies and responds to. Here's an alert message designed within Sage Alerts and Workflow that is actually telling a salesperson about a customer of theirs who's changed their buying habits. This is actually one of my favorite events, because what this alert is actually saying is that we've got a customer here whose sales for the month just ended represents a decrease of at least 30% over the customer's average monthly orders. Now, I happen to know in this particular event's case, this event is looking at the last 6 months of each customer's purchase history to derive what a customer's average monthly purchase amount is, and then compare that average to the month just ended. And like I said, if a customer has experienced a drop of at least 30%, well, let's tell the sales rep that they've got a customer who has significantly changed their buying habits. And even looking at the very last line of this alert message, we can see that Sage Alerts and Workflow has actually scheduled a call within the customer's your corresponding CRM application, whether it's Sage CRM or some other CRM solution, to actually schedule the corresponding account rep, sales rep, to have a phone conversation with that customer and hopefully try and get their buying habits back up to where they used to be. It is important to note that all aspects of your Sage 100 data can be monitored by Alerts and Workflow. We've talked about monitoring AR, and we've talked about monitoring inventory, but also bill of materials, general ledger, purchasing. All of the modules within Sage 100 are what I would call fodder for being monitored and triggering automatic responses. And when it comes to jobs, what you don't want to do is wait until you've used up all your budget to notify someone that, oops, there's no money left, or wait until a job is past due before telling someone, oops, we're running a little bit late here. You want the ability to look at a job that's in progress and be able to determine it looks likely that we're going to run short on either the budget or we're not going to meet the expected delivery date. And Alerts and Workflow can do that kind of analysis. Earlier on, I talked about sometimes a picture being worth 1,000 words. If you're in a business that has lots that expire after a certain amount of time, naturally one of your key concerns is monitoring those lots and letting your staff know about those items that are time sensitive, that do expire, and perhaps having promotions around those items so that they can get sold rather than written off. Purchase order processing, one of my favorite aspects of ERP where Alerts and Workflow can really lend a hand. As we mentioned, the whole purchase order process is a multi-step process, often having to go through multiple layers, levels of review and approval. And the last thing that you want is for a purchase order to get stuck sitting on someone's desk simply because they looked at it a couple of days ago. Now it's under a pile of papers, either real or electronic, and it's out of their brain. They're no longer thinking about it. So being able to make sure that purchase orders do get acted on, do get reviewed and approved on a timely basis is a key part of Alerts and Workflow. In this case, notice this email alert down at the bottom actually has 2 buttons, approve or disapprove, so that the recipient of this alert can actually, right from this email, indicate whether or not that purchase order is approved or rejected. Again, talking about some of the more advanced uses of Sage Alerts and Workflow, how about just looking at bad data, missing data? In this particular example, we've got Alerts and Workflow looking for duplicate items in inventory within Sage 100. Here, a duplicate item being defined as 2 or more items that have the same description but have different item numbers. If sometimes orders get put through and they're missing a client's terms code, or an order contains a certain part which is dependent upon another part. If that order doesn't also include that other part, we need to flag it. We need to notify people. So again, be very creative in terms of the types of business conditions that alerts and workflow can look for. We have a great document called 60 smoke signals that your ERP application can be sending you, because really what alerts and workflow is this rather cool smoke detector for Sage 100, looking at and responding to key business conditions. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention that in addition to all of the other conditions that alerts and workflow can monitor for, it can also tell you whenever you or one of your colleagues have changed any critical pieces of information in the entire Sage 100 application. You tell alerts and workflow, what are those critical values? Is it a customer's credit limit, credit status? Is it an inventory item's lead time? Is it the due date of an expected item that you've ordered from a supplier? Alerts and workflow will monitor any field within Sage 100. It'll tell you when and whether that field has been changed and what it changed from and to. All right. So you've got an idea for what the application can do. You've got a sense for some of the ways that folks are using it today. Before we jump into the application itself, we should certainly talk about how it's licensed and priced. Now, Sage Alerts and Workflow is what's considered a server-based application. What I mean by that is that you typically install it on just one machine. It does not need a dedicated server. You could put it on your Sage 100 server, on your SQL Server box, on your Exchange server. I'm actually running it on my notebook PC that I'm demoing from today. The way Alerts and Workflow is licensed is according to the number of applications that you want it to monitor and based upon the functions that you want Alerts and Workflow to perform. And they're just three. The three functions are alerting, monitoring conditions and sending alerts via email, text message, web dashboard, etc. Secondly is the ability to automatically generate and deliver reports, forms and documents, charts and graphs. And finally, the third area of functionality is what we consider workflow, the ability for the product, Alerts and Workflow, to update information in Sage 100, such as putting a delinquent customer on credit hold, or even putting information into other business applications, such as scheduling a follow-up phone call in a CRM app. Now, I mentioned that Alerts and Workflow is licensed per application that it's monitoring. We refer to each application as a connection. So monitoring Sage 100, all modules, AR, AP, bill of materials, GL, etc., those are all part of a single application, Sage 100. It doesn't matter whether you have multiple companies within Sage 100, it's still one application. So to monitor Sage 100 for an unlimited number of conditions and trigger alerts to an unlimited number of recipients, you'd be looking at a perpetual license price of just under $1,800 or a monthly subscription of just under $100. The two optional modules are, as I mentioned, the reports module and the workflow module. You can see the add-on prices for those two modules. We do offer a bundled price, as you can see, full function referring to alerts, reports, and workflow actions. And you can see the pricing here both for a perpetual license as well as for a monthly subscription. And finally, if you say, well, that's good, Don. I know that what I can do with Sage 100, but I've also got some other applications. I want to monitor my Scanco application. I want to monitor my Alltech document management. I want to monitor my human resources app or my CRM app. For each additional application to be monitored, it's an additional $1,800, well, $1,799 to be exact. And with Alerts and Workflow, there are 4 levels of connections. There's 1, 2, 3, and finally, unlimited. At 4 connections, you automatically get granted what's called an unlimited connection license, enabling you to monitor every single business application you own today or ever will own. Okay. So let's now take a look at the application itself in action. So let me jump out of my PowerPoint and let's jump into Sage Alerts and Workflow. It may prompt me to re-log in, which it does because I've been dormant for a certain amount of time. So let's have it re-log me into the app, and I'll just specify my credentials. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, Alerts and Workflows, a server-based app. It is installed on a single machine. It runs as a Windows service. So here again, I'd like to bring you back to the analogy of that of a smoke detector, because that's really so similar to how Alerts and Workflow operates. And that is, you install it. You tell it about the applications or application modules you wish it to monitor. You tell it about the types of conditions you want it to monitor for, such as overdue invoices, accounts that have had their credit limit or credit status changed. You tell Alerts and Workflow how often to monitor for those conditions, and then you turn it on and you walk away from it. So the analogy would be to install a smoke detector, put the batteries in it, put on the lid, and walk away from it. It sits there constantly monitoring your Sage 100 and related data to see if those critical business activities, conditions, anomalies, exceptions occur, and then to respond accordingly. So what I'd like to do is to actually take you on a tour of an event, as they're called, within Sage Alerts and Workflow. We've been talking a fair bit about invoices. So let's take a look at an event that's designed to monitor and respond to invoices that are overdue for payment. Here we're looking at the event designer, as it's called in Sage Alerts and Workflow. And keep in mind that what you're looking at here is a setup process. Again, once you set up what events you want Alerts and Workflow to monitor for, you've told Alerts and Workflow how to respond to those events when they occur, you then turn Alerts and Workflow on. You walk away from it. It's not unusual for an organization to go weeks or sometimes months without actually logging into Alerts and Workflow. Yeah, you're receiving lots of alerts, email, text messages, etc. You're receiving forms, documents, and reports. You're even having workflow created for you, all done automatically by Alerts and Workflow, but without you actually having to log into the application. Now, Alerts and Workflow is a browser-based application. So as you can see, I have accessed the application through my web browser. This is a single user interface. So you can simply fire up your browser of choice, access Alerts and Workflow, and perform all of the setup work that you need to. Alerts and Workflow also includes a couple of modules for other purposes, including an administration module and also a monitor, so you can keep track of what Alerts and Workflow has been doing, what business conditions has it checked, what alerts has it delivered, etc. But we're going to focus in on an event that looks at and responds to invoices that are overdue for payment. Now, every event consists of 5 basic components, and those 5 components are listed for you or shown to you on the left-hand side of this window. They are highlighted in gray, starting with the description of the event itself, looking at overdue invoices. Now, I'm not going to take you on a bits and bytes detail demo of everything that you see, but I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights. And one important one that I like to point out here is this checkbox titled Repeat Notification for Triggered Items. If you think about an invoice that's overdue, maybe we're having Alerts and Workflow check for overdue invoices maybe once a week, maybe once a day. When Alerts and Workflow finds an overdue invoice, and maybe it sends you an alert, maybe it regenerates the invoice and sends it to the customer, the next time the event runs, whether it's tomorrow or a week later, if that same invoice is still unpaid, i.e. it still meets this event's criteria, do we want Alerts and Workflow to generate another or repeat notification? In truth, there are some business conditions where you want to continue to poke someone, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, this requires your attention. I'm going to keep on poking you or tapping you on the shoulder until you actually respond. In this case, until you actually pay for that invoice for those products or services that you purchased from us. Of course, there are other examples, such as an order confirmation, where a single alert about a given order is sufficient. Now, I mentioned that every event runs on a reoccurring schedule. This event right now is scheduled to run every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Those schedules are completely up to you. You can create additional schedules of your own, whether it's daily, weekly, hourly, every few minutes, continuously. the first or last day of the month, the third Thursday of every month, every conceivable frequency is available to you. That also includes your ability to specify, well, what days of the week the event is going to run. If no one's going to be in the office on Saturdays or Sundays, there's probably no point in my running the event on those days. If we're looking for very time-sensitive conditions like stock status, maybe we're monitoring for that every hour, every 30 minutes or so. Again, you get the ability to say, if I'm checking it every hour, is that 24 hours a day, or is it only during work hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? You can even indicate those dates that are holidays for your organization, because again, someone's not going to be in the office on a holiday to receive an alert. It's probably best for alerts and workflow to not run on a holiday and rather run on the next scheduled work day. Let's move to the third component of an event, its trigger. Now, before we take a closer look at this trigger, I want to talk about trigger types. That is, how does alerts and workflow determine whether certain conditions are met? And it can do so via a number of different methods. Most commonly, with Sage 100, alerts and workflow executes what's referred to as a database query. Database queries can use .NET connectors. It can use other industry standards such as ODBC, OLADB, and we'll take a look at a database-driven query in just a moment. However, alerts and workflow also has a web service component. We actually embed a REST or RESTful Web API within Sage Alerts and Workflow so that it can connect to and monitor data via that REST API. And the reason I want to point that out is that cloud-based applications, and the whole world is moving to the cloud. Cloud-based applications typically require you to communicate to them via web services. And so this is what gives Sage Alerts and Workflow the ability to monitor data in cloud-based solutions. Now, this particular event is using a query called invoices that have that are overdue and, have a balance of greater than X dollars. Here we've specified a triggering threshold of $100. We could modify that if we're so authorized to do so, make it 1,000, 500, whatever is appropriate. But I want to just for a moment take you into the query editor. Because whenever people look at this, they say, well, Don, we need to exclude certain customers from this logic. We know that some of our customers always pay late. So how easy or difficult is it for me as a non-technical person to be able to change the triggering criteria, to maybe add certain fields of data or retrieve certain fields of data from my Sage 100 application? Most Sage 100 organizations have added custom fields, user-defined fields, and they need, of course, Sage Alerts and Workflow to be able to access that data as well. If you've ever written a report for Sage 100, you have all the knowledge you need to be able to create and customize these triggers. Just as a quick example, I'm going to jump over to my filters tab. This event has two filters. It's looking for open invoices where the balance is greater than a certain dollar amount and the invoice due date is less than the current date. What you see here, everything is in a plain English wizard designer. You don't have to know SQL or any kind of programming code. Let's see, in fact, if we do have any overdue invoices, let's say with a balance of greater than, let's use $100 and let's see what we get. And in fact, we do. We've got a number of invoices that are past due. I can take a look at their invoice due date all back in 2010. So I'd say they're egregiously past due. All right. So that's the triggering mechanism for an event. Then, of course, it's left to you to specify how you want the event to respond to this information. Again, this is the action part of actionable insight. Collectively, these actions are referred to as an event's deliverables. What do we want an event to do? First and foremost, people want to send alerts. And those alerts can go out via a number of different methods, including, of course, email. Email is still the #1 most popular alert delivery method, and we have a nice Microsoft Word-like editor for you to design what you want your alert message to look like. Here we're generating a nice-looking HTML table. It's going to show us that customers have invoices that are overdue for payment. You can see the corresponding fields of data that are going to appear within this table. Everything, once again, is wizard driven. You don't have to know HTML syntax or anything like that when designing your alert. For sure, the second most popular delivery method is simply sending a text message. So we can jump over to SMS text and we can design what we want our alert message to say here. And of course, all of the fields of data from Sage 100 are available to be put into the alert messages that are sent out. But let's for a moment come back to our list of deliverables, because I'd like to point out a couple of other deliverables that have been selected for this event. We are generating a chart. This is a bar chart showing us overdue invoice total per sales rep. So we can see which of our sales reps are doing a better and worse job in terms of collections from their delinquent customers. I mentioned earlier that if a customer is past due, probably the most valuable thing that we could do would be to automatically regenerate the invoice for that customer and send it off to them. And that's what we're doing here. We're having alerts in workflow use our invoice template. We're having alerts in workflow generate that invoice in PDF format and automatically, as you'll see in just a minute, deliver it to the corresponding customer. But before we leave our deliverables, I do want to point out here that we've also got the ability for alerts in workflow to go back into applications such as Sage 100, but also other applications to actually add or update data, in this case using the REST web API to actually create a collections record in a hosted application. So let's move on to the final component of an event, which are its subscribers. Whom are we notifying about this particular business condition? Now, alert recipients are divided into two groups, standard and advanced. Standard are when you know the name of the person, people, or groups whom you wish to notify. Here, I'm notifying my finance group, and I'm notifying them via email and web dashboard, but I'm also notifying myself. And now I'm being notified via email and also text message or SMS message to my cell phone. There is no limit to the number of people or groups whom you can notify, whether they're within your organization or are your clients, your prospects, your suppliers, and vendors. But let's take a think back to the purpose of this event, invoices that are overdue. It's all well and good to notify myself and notify my finance group, but honestly, the two most important people to notify are the customer and their sales rep. And that's exactly what we're doing here, and that's why we divide subscribers into these two groups. The advanced subscribers are for when you know that you want to notify one or more people who are related to the records being triggered. So for every overdue invoice, I'm going to regenerate that invoice. I'm going to send it to the customer who's related to that invoice. But I'm also going to carbon copy the customer's sales rep, making sure that everyone who is related to these delinquent invoices get notified that they require their attention. So that's the application. Before we leave the application, I just want to kind of close the loop and show you the net result, or one of the net results of an event like this. And that's an alert message. In this case, an email alert message being sent by Sage Alerts and Workflow to myself, showing me that nice list of customers whose invoices are in fact overdue for payment. This is the default event of this type that comes with Sage Alerts and Workflow. Can you modify it? Absolutely. Can you add or change the fields of data that are shown here? Yes. Can you add to or change the triggering criteria, such as eliminating certain clients from this logic? Absolutely yes, and all through a wizard interface. Okay, so let me jump back into the PowerPoint and finish things up with just a few final slides, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that folks have about Sage Alerts and Workflow. I mentioned that this event we just looked at is one of the pre-configured events that come with Sage Alerts and Workflow at no cost for use with Sage 100. In fact, there are 85 pre-configured events for Sage 100. And you can get that list of what those 85 are by visiting alertsandworkflow.com. But we don't stop there. If you're using add-on solutions to Sage 100, and I've mentioned a couple already, Scanco, Sage Inventory Advisor, maybe Avalara for sales tax. Sage Alerts and Workflow integrates with those solutions too, because if you think about it, they also have data in them that is worthy of being monitored and responded to. Also, we've got pre-configured event packs, not just for Sage CRM, but for other CRM applications as well. In total, we have over 100 event packs, collections of pre-configured events for different front office and back office applications, all of which are available to you. Now, I've used the analogy of a smoke detector for Sage Alerts and Workflow, and here I think is one of the best aspects of that analogy. There are over 12,000 organizations worldwide who have implemented Sage Alerts and Workflow. We do all first-level support on the product, and we get an average of just under 6 new support requests a day. And so what that means is that over 90% of all customers who have purchased Sage Alerts and Workflow need no support. It really is a set it and forget it application. And just to interject a brief personal story, I was interviewed by an industry analyst a few years back. They had invited a client using Sage Alerts and Workflow. The interviewer turned to the client and said, if you could summarize what you like about Sage Alerts and Workflow in a single sentence, what would that sentence be? And the gentleman responded, it just works. And I think that's the bottom line for any software application, particularly one like this, where you just set it up, turn it on, and walk away from it. You simply expect it to work, and it does. Finally, from an ROI perspective, in terms of using Sage Alerts and Workflow to automate so many of those tasks or parts of tasks that you're currently doing manually, whether it's things like invoicing, order confirmations, running reports, looking for and responding to anomalies or exception management, we're able to quantify an average savings of 20 minutes per day per ERP software user. And so an organization that has even just 6 users of an ERP application, at the end of a year, you're able to actually recoup a grand total of 66 days worth of employee time. And just think what you could do with that additional time to help grow your business. Now, before I open up the lines for Q&A, I do want to make you all aware of a special promotion that's taking place now for, I think it's about a month and a half or so through the end of August, and it's this. I talked about how Sage Alerts and Workflow is licensed per connection, per application that it's monitoring. Through your business partner, they have negotiated a special offer of buy a 1 connection license for monitoring your Sage 100 data, and you automatically get a second connection, and that's an $1,800 value for free. So whether that second application is another solution from Sage, like Sage CRM, Sage HRMS, whether it's for monitoring data in a Sage 100 add-on like Avalara or Scanco or Sage Inventory Advisor, or whether it's for monitoring an application completely outside of the Sage world from another vendor, perhaps even a homegrown application, the offer is that you purchase a 1 connection license for monitoring Sage 100, and you get a second connection to monitor any other application that you want for free. And one last note about that, that second connection, that free connection, can not only be used to monitor an additional application, it can also be used to monitor the content of incoming email. So if you've ever thought of some of your email accounts like info@ or sales@yourcompany.com as black holes where emails simply go to die, you can actually use that second connection to monitor an unlimited number of email accounts and to automatically identify, respond, and process those incoming emails by Sage Alerts and Workflow. So just something for you to think about in terms of this limited time promotion. So at this point, let me check with my colleague Mike to see if any questions have come in that we can answer.
All right, left myself on mute there. Well, I think we got a couple we can at least start with while we wait for some more to come in. First one I
Perfect.
got for you, Don, is what happens if an alert fails to reach its intended recipient, such as if the email or like a cell phone is wrong?
Right, that's an excellent question. So fortunately, we've anticipated that circumstance because it's kind of a sad truth that sometimes people change their email addresses, they change their cell phone number, or an email server goes down. Alerts and Workflow is built as a monitoring application, and so in addition to monitoring what's going on in other applications, it automatically includes the ability to monitor itself. We've actually nicknamed this the event watchdog because it is alerts and workflow monitoring itself, looking for things like failed alert deliveries. If alerts and workflow was supposed to generate an invoice and send that invoice to the customer, but that invoice did not reach that customer because of a server being down, an invalid address, etc. Alerts and workflow will actually identify that condition, and just like any other event, it can then trigger alerts and automated responses based upon the failure to successfully deliver an alert, a report, or even the inability to successfully execute a response action. And what's kind of especially cool about this is that you can go into the monitor right within alerts and workflow and look at the status of its executed actions, alerts, and deliveries. And it'll automatically show any of those that failed to be successfully completed, and it will automatically try to resend or re-execute that failure X number of times as defined by each organization.
Okay. Another one we got is how does Sage Alerts and Workflow store its data? Is it a flat file, some form of database?
Another very good question, and this actually is particularly well timed because of the latest version of Sage Alerts and Workflow. The software that I demonstrated to everyone today is our version 10 product, also nicknamed the new technology. Prior to version 10, Sage Alerts and Workflow was storing its data in a collection of Microsoft Access databases. That was good, but if you pardon the expression, not really industrial strength. All of that underlying architecture has been updated for version 10. Version 10 of Sage Alerts and Workflow stores its data in a Microsoft SQL Server environment that can be full SQL or SQL Express, your choice. Alerts and Workflow also, its overall technology, it's a .NET-based application, so everything is using current technology standards. But to answer directly that question, it is a SQL Server-based application storing its data in the SQL environment. Do we have any other questions, Mike?
Not that I'm seeing yet. Do you see any, Sherry?
No, just as a reminder, if you have a question, you can either click the hand button on your admin tool and raise your hand. We can unmute your line, or if you want to submit it via chat, we can go ahead and read them that way.
Perfect. Well, let me convey one final piece of information then as people gather the thoughts to see if there are any final questions, and that's this. We encourage you to give Sage Alerts and Workflow a try, and that's a free trial. It is the live shipping software that you can download from our website, alertsandworkflow.com. That's all spelled out, alertsandworkflow.com. You can download the live shipping software. And then when you install it, and it uses the standard Windows installer, it takes just a couple of minutes to install, what you're automatically given is a 30-day license. So you have 30 days with which to try out the software. You have full and free access to our tech support department if you have any questions as you're working with that trial. So again, don't take our word for it. Install it, try it. That collection of 85 pre-configured events for Sage 100 comes with the trial. So again, you can just turn on certain events that are of interest to your organization. You can trigger those alerts. If you do decide then to move ahead with Sage Alerts and Workflow, You can place that order with your business partner, and the only thing you'll get back is a new license code. So everything that you've tried during the trial process gets moved into a live production environment. So that trial time and effort is not at all wasted. You really set yourself up for a very good production system. But by all means, do try the software. Let us know if you have any questions. All right, Sherry, I think I'll turn the proceedings back over to you if there are no additional questions.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone for, again, taking time out of their schedule to learn a little bit more about alerts and workflow. And a big thank you to Don for presenting the information to everyone. We will be sending a recording of this webinar, again, to everybody that's attended, and you'll see that in the next few days. Thank you all, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sherry. Thanks, Mike. Everyone, take care. Stay safe. Thanks again.
Bye.